All right. So would you like to tell us a little bit about your background and how Sematic got started?
Yes, for sure. So I'm originally from France. I started my career in academia about 15 years ago. I was doing physics research at CERN, the big physics lab in Switzerland, looking at boson and other things. I left academia in 2011 and started working at a number of small startups in Europe. Eventually, I moved to the US in 2014 when I joined Instacart, a grocery delivery company, which is fairly big now, but it was pretty small at the time. It was about 200 people. So I had to work across all aspects of the product. After 4 years at Instacart, I joined Cruise, the self-driving car company based in San Francisco. At Cruise, I worked mostly on machine learning infrastructure. When I joined, there wasn't much infrastructure around ML, so I founded with a number of other engineers the ML platform team, and built all sorts of systems, infrastructure, and backends to support all of the machine learning and data science teams at Cruise. And we were able to support the commercial launch of the Cruise cars. So now Cruise has robo-taxis going around the city of San Francisco, Austin, and Phoenix. And this required a lot of model training. The car has dozens of models on it for object detection, planning, tracking, controls, and so on. Training those models requires a lot of infrastructure because you have to consume a large amount of data that's been collected by the cars, transform this data into feature data sets, train large neural net models. Sometimes, the training jobs can last for many hours or many days, and then estimate performance metrics and so on. So that requires a lot of infrastructure to run those pipelines. So we built all the tooling so that engineers could easily train those models. I left Cruise in April 22. And founded Sematic. So the idea behind Sematic is to bring the learnings that we gathered from working at Cruise for 4 years to the rest of the industry, and also make it open source. So we built an open source ML platform. It's essentially a tool to build end-to-end pipelines in a very easy way, so that ML teams can automate their model training and easily retrain models on new data without having to scramble for to find where the code is or how to run it, how to stitch together different steps. So it's really end-to-end automation. So yeah, we started Sematic in April. We got into YCombinator for the summer batch. So we did the S22 batch, graduated in September. We raised a seed round. We raised about $3 million in September. And that enabled us to grow the team. So now we're a team of 5 engineers, 4 of which are ex-Cruise engineers. And so now our target is to build a fully hosted SaaS product on top of the open source platform that we built so far. So that's roughly where we are at this time.
That is incredible. Your background is incredible, and I get how Sematic started from problems you experienced firsthand in your experience. So how did you go about picking a license and attracting the first contributors, which comes in the beginning of every new project?
Yeah, so picking the license for me was a matter of making it as open as possible. We decided to be open source, so you don't have to be shy when you're open source. You have to go all out and really let people use your product for free and so on. So basically picking the license that is the most open, but also lets us use the product commercially. That's how we chose it. We chose the Apache license, the version 2. And we didn't really spend too much time thinking about it. We saw what others were doing in the field, what is common around the industry, and then we went with that. Regarding first contributors, well, obviously the first contributors were, the founders like me, for example. But then we quickly gathered some interest amongst like young data scientists and ML engineers. So students or people that are early in their careers are always very eager to contribute to open source projects because it gives them experience. They get to work with more senior engineers that have more experience. And so they learn the good patterns and so on. And in addition to that, they need to build up their own sort of resume and their own career and pedigree. And so being able to say that they contributed to an open source project is always also good for them. So it's a win-win because for us, it brings contributions from the outside, which means the product moves faster. We also have different perspectives on different ideas for the products. And for them, it brings them experience and lines on their resume.
That's great. That's definitely a reason to contribute, and of course, reaching out to academia and students. I've heard from other founders as well. That is a great move in the beginning. So,
Yep.
And what would you say are the benefits, namely of open sourcing your project, but also challenges you have faced as a maintainer so far?
Yeah, so I decided to make Sematic open source in the first place because as a developer, when I'm looking for a tool on the market, if something is closed source, I have no way of seeing if the code is sane, if it's well tested, what are the sort of architectural decisions that have been made. So it's very obscure and it's really hard to tell if something is good or not. You can't even necessarily try it for free. So closed source for me was a no-go. I'm not really interested in doing closed source software. So I decided to make it open source from the start. And to me, it's important because it means that our users can try us for free. They are free to use the product on their local machine, on a laptop, but they can even deploy the platform entirely in their own infrastructure. Obviously, that requires a bit more skills. You need to know how to deploy a Kubernetes cluster, how to deal with infrastructure and so on. That's obviously a bit more skill, which is why we also sell our expertise. But it means that users really have the freedom to experience the entire product without having to commit to like a commercial deal or contract, which is very important. I remember as an engineer working at Cruise or Instacart, it was really important that we were able to try something out for a couple of weeks before deciding to enter a deal with a particular vendor. And that only works if the product is open source. That's one reason. Another reason is also that, when you notice a bug or a missing feature in a product, if it's not open source, your only recourse is to keep bugging the team until they decide that it's priority, which may never happen. If it's open source, you can submit a PR. Of course, it may take some time to get merged, but at least you can use a branch of the product in your own code base with the bug fix and so on. So that's really a big advantage that people can fix their own bugs, fix our bugs basically.
Absolutely. And challenges you have experienced so far?
The challenge is definitely that, when you have contributions from the outside, you need to always be on top of it. You have to show momentum. If you have contributors that are coming into your projects and being very motivated, giving some of their time, like free time, we don't pay contributors, obviously, right? This is the model for open source. At some point we may, reward some of those contributions, but at this time, they're free. So it means that when they spend some of their free time contributing to your project, you should be fast and swift in your response to their contribution. So code review, PR merge, and so on has to be fast, which means that the team has to get on it pretty quickly. So that's a challenge because, we always are very busy. We have our own roadmap and so on, but we still have to make time for those external contributions. So that's one challenge. Another challenge is that, which is a challenge and also a benefit. One thing I like about open source is that it forces you to have a very high code quality. You can't have hacky solutions. You can't have hard-coded things. You can't, store, like, for example, secrets in your code base. I mean, it's always a big no-no to store secrets in your code base, but even more so when you're open source, because it would mean that everybody can see, your AWS keys or whatever it is. So those constraints are even stronger when you do open source. Everything has to be clean, no hacky solutions. So that's a forcing function for us to always produce the best possible code. So that's good. You also have to document everything, not only document everything for people who want to use the products, but also document the abstractions in your code so that people who want to contribute don't have to ask you too many questions to get started. They can simply read the doc strings of all the classes, of all the functions, and say, okay, this is how things are done. I'm going to mirror this pattern, and so on. And you also have to organize your roadmap and your GitHub issues in a good way. So, for example, from the start we tagged certain issues as good issues to get started. So things that don't require too much understanding of how the code works, so that somebody that just wants to get started finds those. We have like maybe a dozen of those that are always open for people to pick up anytime, and they require maybe like a few dozen lines of code. So this is something that we set up so that people can easily jump into the code base and start contributing. So these are not challenges per se, but it definitely forces you to think about your code base in a slightly different way.
Yeah, and once you get it right, it can be a humongous benefit. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And so you touched briefly on monetization. At this stage, how are you approaching it? Is it too early to think about it?
No, we are already monetizing, obviously not in a very reproducible way, but the way that we started is by sort of contracting pilot deals with certain customers. Mm-hmm. So because the product is still getting matured and getting built out, we don't have, like, for example, we don't have a fully hosted service for people to just sign up and start using the product. So we entered deals with a couple of customers to basically be very dedicated to them. We have Slack channels with them. We deploy the product in their own infrastructure. We also give them access to our roadmap so that they can ask us to prioritize certain features. So it's really like a fixed term pilot program. So it usually lasts about 12 weeks for a fixed number of features, fixed time, and fixed amount of money as well. So this is how we monetize at this time. Obviously, this is not a scalable way to monetize in the long term because this requires way too much time from the Sematic team. So in the longer term, we will follow two avenues for revenue. One is the SaaS product, as I mentioned, like a hosted product. People sign up, try it for free for a bit, then put a credit card and then keep using it using a subscription. That's one avenue. Another one is on-prem. For the type of product that we are building, a lot of customers want the platform deployed in their own infrastructure because they want to use their own compute resources, their own storage resources. They don't necessarily want to use an external service. So for bigger customer, we'll also have to offer an on-prem solution, and in that case, the deals are more like ad hoc per customer, depending on the workload. So these are the two ways that we will monetize the product. It's very it's known as the open core model, if you will, where you have an open source product that is free to use, and then you offer additional services on top of it that you charge for. So for us, the additional services would be hosting the platform or deploying it internally in somebody's infrastructure.
Phenomenal. And just for this can be beneficial to other founders to hear early stage. So for these early contracts, you did ask those companies for a monetary commitment, and that's how you got started with the pilots.
Yeah, so there's different models. There are certain companies that are, when you're an early stage company, you're more interested in having users and to get feedback on your product than necessarily having revenue. Once you have feedback, you can adjust your product to find this so-called like PMF, product market fit. And once you have that, then you can, monetize more. So in the beginning, it's okay sometimes to work for a company without any monetary compensation. Of course, it's better if you do, because it means that your product is so valuable that people are willing to pay for it. But that's not always the case, especially if some of your users are also early stage companies. And so that means that they don't necessarily have a lot of budget themselves. So we have different customers. Some customers did commit to a paid contract. Some others we're happy to provide it to them for free. For example, we were part of YCombinator, as I explained earlier, and we have other companies in the same batch that are basically the same stage as we are, as young as we are, also got founded in 2022. And so we were happy to give them access to the product, help them deploy it internally without any compensation, because we're all in the same boat, same type of company. So we are happy to have them use the product for free.
That's awesome. And are you able to share a few, metrics or maybe aspects of your growth to date of the usage
Yeah,
and
so
benefits
as an open,
people?
yeah, for sure. As an open source company, as I'm sure you're aware, one of the big metrics are GitHub stars. It's a bit of a vanity metric. It doesn't really mean that your product is the best. It doesn't mean that you have revenue or anything. It just means that your product is somewhat popular amongst users, amongst developers, and that it triggers their interest. So we launched the product in July. So July 1st we had 0 stars, and right now we're almost at 700. I think there's 660 stars by now, which for a product in our area, so like a machine learning platform, which is somewhat niche, is pretty good. We are pretty happy about that. We have some steady growth there. We're getting a few dozen stars every week. So we're pretty happy about it. Obviously, as I mentioned, that's not necessarily an indicator of success, but so being part of YCombinator was very helpful to get started with those stars, because when you're part of YC, you get access to Hacker News. I'm sure you know Hacker News. And getting on the front page of Hacker News is very difficult usually, but when you're part of YC, they give you almost a guaranteed spot on the front page for about 12 hours, like for one day. Basically, you get to do your launch, and typically, if your product is good, that gathers a lot of comments and a lot of stars as well. So that was very helpful to get us started. And now, we get those stars by getting on newsletters, on podcasts like this one, for example. Or other types of, LinkedIn as well is a good source. Also, a lot of like email marketing and so on. So that's for GitHub stars. Then in terms of revenue, as I mentioned, we're very early at this time, so we do have a little bit of revenue, but nothing really to brag about, because we're still in the phase of figuring out product market fit. Another sort of metrics of growth is the team itself. So I'm a solo founder, so I started by myself. And now we're a team of 5 engineers, and 4 of which, including myself, are ex-Cruise engineers. So I was able to attract very senior talent from Cruise and other companies. If we look at all the pedigree of the team, we've worked at Cruise, Instacart, Adobe, Microsoft, Google, and so on. So Adobe as well. So a group of very skilled engineers, which gives me a lot of confidence as to our ability to build a very good product.
100%. Sounds like a dream team. And I reckon you will be expanding this team with the contributor base increasing, with all the work to be done, and you secured new funding too. So the current teammates, they came from your personal network, previous co-workers. How are you thinking about approaching hiring for new team members? And will you contribute first?
Yeah, for sure. So as you mentioned, most of the current hires come from my network. One of them doesn't, though. So we did hire an infrastructure engineer that we didn't know before. And the way we hired him was also to leverage the YC network. So, YC has a job board. So when you're a YC company, you can post a job listing there. And because it's very popular amongst developers, you get a lot of inbound applicants for your job listings. So that worked well for engineers. I think at the current time, we may not hire more engineers in the very near future, because we're an early stage company. We have to limit our burn. We cannot hire dozens of people. So I think in terms of engineering, maybe in the next 12 months, we will hire a sort of developer evangelist, so like a community advocate. There's different words for it. Basically, somebody to use the product as much as possible to build example pipelines and advertise them with videos on YouTube or LinkedIn to really evangelize the product, go to meetups, go to conferences, and so on. And for that, a contributor would be a good candidate, because it's somebody that both has the technical skills to jump in the code base and solve issues, and also has interest in general in open source software, and is willing to do work outside of his regular job to contribute to software. So contributors could be a good pool of candidates for that position. One other position we want to fill actually pretty quickly in the next 3 months is a head of sales. We're a team of engineers. We're 5 engineers. So obviously sales is not our main skill. And it's important to sales is a very sort of technical job. You need to know all about marketing, all about how to leverage different channels, as I'm sure you know as a founder yourself. And so we would like some help from somebody that has experience in that area. So for that, the open source channels are not as useful because those people are not, developers, so they don't contribute to open source software. So we may have to use more traditional channels such as, job listings and so on.
And at the moment, is there a specific customer profile, company profile that you're trying to have conversations with and onboard in terms of the size, in terms of,
Yeah, for sure. So the size of companies we're looking at, we're targeting right now are what's called mid-market, which basically means companies that are, Series B, Series C, that have enough funding to consider buying tooling, and also have a sufficient need for tooling because they need to grow fast and train more models, deploy more models. In terms of the type of the industries that we're targeting, because of our experience working at Cruise, we have a lot of experience in computer vision, autonomous driving, robotics, industrial automation, all those types of businesses that require long pipelines. Our tool Sematic is really useful in those cases. It can also be useful for lighter workloads like data science and regressions and so on. That also works. But definitely our expertise lies more in computer vision. So we are targeting companies that are doing robotics, autonomous driving. For example, there's hundreds of companies doing autonomous farming. So adding, devices to trucks and tractors to be able to plow fields automatically, or any of those types of construction vehicles, or bulldozers and things like that. So there's lots of companies that are trying to retrofit legacy non-autonomous vehicles into autonomous vehicles. And so all of those are basically adding captors like video cameras or lidars or radars to those vehicles, and they need to train models, and they need to retrain models often every time they need to deploy into a new environment. So for example, for the Cruise cars, let me give you an example. A Cruise launched in San Francisco. That was the first city that they launched into. So most of the training data was coming from, the entire training data was coming from San Francisco. When they decided to launch in Austin, Texas, obviously, a street is, you could say a street is a street, but a street in Austin, Texas is not necessarily the same as a street in San Francisco. San Francisco has a lot more traffic, a lot more sort of strange situations, whereas Austin maybe is a bit more streamlined or has different challenges. And so you need to retrain the models with new data. If you don't have an end-to-end pipeline, you can just click and point to the new data set to retrain the model. It can take you months to get there. So you need to have a tool like Sematic to be able to retrain the pipeline quickly and launch. And basically that's what Cruise was able to do. In a few months, they were able to launch in Phoenix and Austin because they had tooling such as Sematic to retrain those pipelines. So any of those companies need fast retraining. So we're targeting those companies. We're not necessarily going after enterprise at this time, so large companies, because there are security requirements for those companies are usually higher. They need to have more compliance, like SOC 2 and so on, and we're not there yet. But in the next few months, we will start to go what's called upmarket, basically targeting those larger companies, because also in the current economic climate, mid-market companies are a little bit more insecure. They're trying to conserve funds, and it makes sense. There's a recession coming, so people are trying to conserve money, and so they're less willing to pay for tools, whereas enterprise companies are a little bit more comfortable. They're also reducing spending, but are a bit more comfortable to spend money. So we will definitely try to go up market a little bit in the next few months.
I love the example with Cruise, so thanks for sharing that. And you mentioned how YC has been very helpful since the beginning of the journey. Are there any YC founders, specific companies that you have followed, that you took their advice to heart, that you've been in touch with?
Yeah, so when you join YC, you're part of a sort of a cohort where they assign to you. They're called they're basically coaches or mentors, if you will. Group partners, they're called group partners. So you have 4 of them, and they typically try to assign you partners that have expertise in the area of your company. So not necessarily machine learning in our case, but at least open source or developer tools. And so, for example, for us, one of our group partners was Nicolas Desaigne, who is actually a French founder, who founded Algolia, this very big search company. So, almost every search out there in every like Gitbook, for example, or Hacker News, or many other companies are using Algolia for their search. It's very powerful. And so Nicolas Dusseigne has a lot of experience building a developer tool into a unicorn company and making it like the standard. So he was very helpful there. So Dalton, what's his last name? I'm sorry. Apologies to him. I forgot his last name. But essentially, he followed this company called PostHog. So PostHog is a company that does an open source metrics platform. And they were part of I think the Winter 20 batch. And so Dalton was their group partner at the time. So he saw them. Now they're very successful. PostHog is very successful. And so he saw them developing the playbook for open source developer tools. And so he gathered lots of good data from seeing that journey. And so that was very helpful to also hear from him around that. So in addition to group partners, you also have repeat founders in YC. So people that have already founded companies before and they're founding a new company. And so they're part of YC. Some of them have even done YC prior to this batch. And so it's their second or third time doing YC. And so they have experience going through the motions and founding successful companies. So for example, there's this company called MedPlum that is doing an open source medical software. And so they have experience, growing successful companies in the past, so they can tell you what mistakes not to make. That's really the big thing about YC, is that those people have seen hundreds, if not thousands, of companies before. Some of them fail, some of them succeed. And so they can tell you the general mistakes that people make and that you need to avoid. For example, don't hire too fast, don't spend your money too fast, focus on your product and getting customers first, and so on, which seem like, obvious advice when you hear it like that, but it's not so obvious when you're, knee deep in the work, and your head down and you're not, looking up. So this is very valuable.
That's excellent. And I reckon the programming of YC, as it relates to open source companies, will probably be evolving with all these new companies going really big. And you mentioned a few examples. What has been your biggest surprise building in open source?
Yeah, so I guess my biggest surprise is that, so, as I mentioned, we do a lot of effort to get people to be interested in the product. Now we do LinkedIn marketing, we do email outreach and so on, and we try to get people interested and start the repo and start using it. So some of the people that we see coming into our Discord channel or starting our repo are definitely coming from those channels, but sometimes we see people coming in, we don't know where they come from. They're not connections on LinkedIn, they're not on our Discord, and they start starting us and joining. Like, how do you find us? And we start learning that Sematic has been featured in some mailing lists somewhere in India or China or in Europe or Africa, and we have those people joining. It's like, oh, that's amazing. People are finding us. Even we put out a lot of effort for people to find us, and still people find us through other ways. So that's always very interesting. And also, seeing all those contributors, as I mentioned, those students or early career professionals that are contributing, was also very surprising, because as an engineer, when I was back at Cruise, I always wanted to contribute to open source, but I rarely had the time or the energy. When you have a full day of work and with responsibilities in your company, at the end of the day, you don't necessarily have the energy to pull out the laptop and start contributing to open source. So contributing to open source was always a bit of a long-term goal, and in those companies, you also want to open source the internal tools as well. And so seeing people that are willing to spend time, writing code for you. And, we have a very high bar in terms of code quality. So sometimes we have to make comments to those PRs. We can just merge PRs blindly. And so we are quite demanding sometimes, and we feel bad because oh my God, this person has been so generous with their time, and we're still giving them constructive feedback to improve the code, and people are very willing to apply those comments and hang in there with us. So I've been very grateful for people's time, and so very sort of surprised and grateful for the generosity of the community, basically.
I love it, and of course we will be linking Sematic for people to come and join. So the best way for someone to contribute, of course, is to go to your GitHub repository and join your Discord and get started. I would like to, so you mentioned of the challenges and the benefits. As a last question, I would like to ask you, what has changed? What is different now? If you could put your finger at it. It seems like building an open source or open core company, there's something different the last few years. How would you describe that?
Yeah, so I think so my view is probably biased because this is the first time that I work for an open source company. But I think for a long time, the industry was seeing open source as like, oh, it's a cute little thing, even though, large products like Linux, for example, is open source, and almost the entire world is running on Linux. All of the cloud infrastructure is running on Linux. So open source is definitely not a gimmick. It's something definitely unique. You look at other industries, nobody is working for free or giving out their source for free. If you think about, like, let's say architecture or construction, like things outside of software, very few industries are giving away their sort of special sauce for free for everybody to look at, right? Everything is closed outside of software. So it's a very unique behavior that's only maybe in research, in academia, where it's basically the baseline, everything is public because you're like actually writing papers and you have to publish your methods to prove that you did the work correctly. So open source software is a very unique practice. And I think for a long time, it was seen as like, oh yeah, it's cute. It's a way to attract developers. If companies release, a bit of tooling, open source is basically just a way for them to grow their recruiting brand and hire more engineers, which is great. But I think in recent years, there's been a shift, and now people see it as a very valuable way to have high quality products. Because there's a lot of scrutiny on open source software, especially when you start thinking about cryptography, especially now with cryptocurrencies, where security and scrutiny is very important. And so closed source software is no longer trusted amongst developers. Only open source software is trusted. If you look at encrypted chat apps, for example, Signal or Telegram, they are trusted because maybe not the entire program, but actually the cryptographic core is public and it can be scrutinized by experts in the field. So I think now it's seen as almost as a standard, and it's more trusted when the product is open source because experts from the company or from other like from academia can inspect the code and guarantee that it's high quality. So now it's moving from this recruiting tool to more of a pledge of quality, of guarantee of quality of the product. And it's also a proof of goodwill of the company. If you're an open source company, it means that you aim to make money through additional services, through high quality service, not through just selling, hacky code to sort of naive customers. No longer like this. It's basically your goodwill. You want to build a good product, and on top of that, you want the product to be so good that people are willing to pay for it, even though they could be using it for free. So I think that's a bit of a shift in the last few years. I think you're right.
Absolutely, and the trust is at the core of it.
Exactly, yes.
As a last remark, an open source founders getting started today, from your experience so far, and again, it's your first year, but from your experience so far, any piece of advice, any maybe mistake or that?
Yeah. So I think you have to be very humble as an open source founder, because somebody is going to read your code and find it not good, or you have to really be open to criticism. You have to be very candid with feedback. This is actually a culture that we grew at Cruise, where code review was extremely candid and direct. Sometimes when you read the pull request and the code review, you're like, oh my God, those people are really rough with each other. We're always polite, obviously, but we don't sugarcoat things. If something can be better, we say it as it is. We always provide constructive criticism, but it means as a developer, you need to be humble. Everybody thinks their code is the best ever, right? When you write code, you're so proud of it. You think that it's the best ever, that nobody will have any comments and you will be able to merge it right away. In the end, it doesn't work like that. You typically have days, weeks of review, and at the end, your code is much better. So you have to know that even though you think that you're a good developer, there's always somebody that has a better idea, and you have to be open to criticism, open to better ideas. And if you don't like the idea, you cannot just dismiss it. Oh, I don't like this. You have to have rational arguments why the solution is not optimal. And that forces you to review your own assumptions and to have good justifications for your choices. When you're closed source, you don't need to justify anything to anybody. You can just write your quote unquote shitty code and ship it out, and nobody will know. So as an open source contributor, you need to be able to justify. If somebody asks, oh, why did you choose this abstraction or this dependency or this a third-party tool to do this. Why not this other way? You can't just say, this is what we did. You have to say, well, because reason A, B, and C, and if we had chosen something else, this wouldn't be true, and so on. You always have to convince other developers of the reasons why you did things. So you have to have some humility, even though you may think that you're the best developer in the world. You need to know that that's not the case, and others have a lot of value to bring you, even though they might be way more junior than you are. We've met very young developers that were mind-blowing in their vision of code. So yeah, you have to be humble. So as an open source founder, I would advise to always be welcoming to external contributors, even when sometimes you have shitty PRs that are coming in, people that are writing a lot of code and not very good. You have to basically carry them along and educate them to get to a better spot. The same way that you would if it was a junior engineer on your team. Let's say you're in a team and a junior engineer has been hired and their first PR is not so good maybe. You don't tell them this is terrible, you're fired. You tell them, okay, let's work on it together. Let's make it better. And over time, week after week, those developers get better, and you don't need, and the amount of work you need to do to get their PR in a mergeable state is less and less. So basically, always be welcoming and inclusive of external people, regardless of their skills.
Absolutely, sounds amazing, and that's a great way to end our interview together. Thank you so much, Emmanuel.
Of course, yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.